We are on. As people slowly drift in, I just wanted to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who are signing in online, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you're tuning in from. I'm Charles Edel. I'm a senior advisor in the Australia chair here at CSIS, and I'm thrilled to welcome all of you to this really interesting and rather important event that we're doing, discussing the media landscape in the Pacific Island region and how partners like the United States can help support a free and open space for journalism. As you all know, the media sector in the Pacific Islands faces some significant challenges, including limited resources, geographic isolation, which can restrict access to timely and relevant news sources. In addition to that, of course, geo-strategic competition has thrust the Pacific into the middle of a battle over information and disinformation. The United States and many of its partners have done much to support a free and open media, but there's much more that we could do to think about how we support such a vital part of the functioning of these states as they push this forward. Now, today we have a really interesting and dynamic conference here this morning. We have two panels for you to look at, to examine what the Pacific media landscape looks like from a Pacific perspective. First and foremost, we have several prominent Pacific journalists who will be up here, or rather signing in up here, virtually and online. And then we also have a panel of folks collected from across the U.S. government to think about, to help us push forward the conversation about how we can help support with media and journalism on our own and, of course, in coordination with others. But before all that, I'm absolutely thrilled to have Ambassador Rosemary Banks, New Zealand's ambassador to the United States, to help us kick things off. Ambassador Banks, who knows journalism very well, but has been serving as New Zealand's ambassador to the United States since June of 2024, but that's after she was reappointed to come back to Washington, having first served from 2018 to 2022. In that intervening period, she returned home to New Zealand and was chairing the U.S.-New Zealand Council. She has an extensive background in diplomacy, spanning more than 4 decades, where she served as New Zealand's permanent representative to the OECD, to the United Nations, and their ambassador not only to the U.S. but to France and Portugal as well. It's a distinct honor to welcome her here. I'd love to invite her up to the stage now. Thanks very much.
Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai ki tēnei hui. Greetings to you all in Te Reo Māori. And thank you, Dr. Edel and CSIS, for this invitation to start today's discussion of the media sector in the Pacific Islands and what can be done to strengthen and future-proof this essential pillar of democracy and open societies. I'm going to start out with a story from an impressive young woman I met in March this year. We'll call her Helen. She works for a national newspaper in a Pacific Island country. This is what she shared with me about the challenges she faces, what would help her, and what she aspires to in the future. Helen has a BA in political science, and from university she worked for a time for a political party. She then joined a newspaper where she learned on the job how to be a reporter. I know from my conversations with Helen that she's highly motivated to make a difference in her country, in her community, by presenting the facts fairly and without bias. But she's challenged by editorial policy. Senior staff have warned her off sensitive topics like China and Taiwan. And one of her bosses reminded her that she didn't work for a big newspaper like the Washington Post or the New York Times, that their choices were constrained. They weren't free to report exactly the issues that they wanted to or what they wanted to say. Helen has also experienced some pressure from a certain embassy whose representative told her that people didn't need the facts. She robustly rejected that view, of course. Now, Helen is courageous, and she understands well the geopolitical, the domestic political, and the cultural tripwires that she faces in her environment. But in her own words, she's told me this. She said, "I won't let my freedom of speech come into question or my voice be silenced. Even if it threatens my job, I'll report freely what I see." She acknowledges all the constraints of her situation, a low salary, difficulty in collecting information against cultural reluctance or political pressures, and a feeling of being constantly under close scrutiny. Her dream is to be better trained in her profession, to be bold enough to speak up about issues without fear of retribution, to be better able, in effect, to be a protector of democracy in her country, and she's acutely aware of the role that the media plays in doing just that. I know she'd love to be here to tell you in her own words what would help her, what would give her the opportunity she'd love to have for offshore training and professional support. I'm sure that the Pacific media who are going to follow would find this story from Helen familiar. I'm now going to draw attention to 3 recent developments in the Pacific media environment that are all totally relevant to today's discussion. It's a debate which is becoming quite a lively one. Then after that, I'll extract from those sources what's been identified in these recent Pacific meetings by the Lowy Institute, for example, and others as actions that could help or would help to strengthen the Pacific media sector and make it more resilient. Also just say that in preparing for today's discussions, I've had updates on the Pacific media environment as they see it from 3 of our High Commissioners in Pacific countries. And actually one of them is a former journalist, so takes a really deep and personal interest in the health of Pacific media. So turning now to the Pacific media environment, as we all know from our own countries and our own experience, the media environment everywhere is changing rapidly, from traditional, from print to digital, and from, the kind of stuff we used to use to social media. And now with a supercharger of artificial intelligence on top of that is a lot of change in this sector. Also, as we all know, the way that people absorb and access information is changing rapidly, including in the Pacific Islands, and we're all vulnerable to disinformation and misinformation. The Pacific is impacted very much by these changes, and the Lowy Institute, interestingly, published, and you may have seen it in their newsletter, The Interpreter, they published a report quite recently on the first ever Pacific Disinformation Conference that was held in Brisbane just early last month. And this conference noted that, and I quote it here, they say, "A surge in connectivity has exacerbated the region's challenges, undermining trust in science and in government." And that's not something that's happening just in the Pacific. We can see that around the globe. The source also noted, and this is a really interesting statistic, I think, that about 80% of the populations of Fiji, Nauru, Tuvalu, Samoa, and Marshall Islands are online, and that is actually a percentage that's well above the global average. That Brisbane conference was supported by the United Nations Information Centre in the Pacific and co-hosted by Griffith University. The goal was to explore global strategies to combat disinformation with a focus on 3 particular areas that have affected the Pacific, namely elections, climate change, and public health. The Pacific Islands Forum has also been monitoring the changing media landscape around the region and has concluded that political instability, governance challenges, and limited resources continue to undermine democratic systems in the Pacific. The Forum observed that misinformation, disinformation, and foreign interference are making matters worse, further threatening regional sovereignty, social cohesion, and the stability of electoral systems. The Commonwealth has also picked up on this threat. When the Commonwealth heads of government met in October in Samoa, King Charles III also put his finger on this problem. And the UNDP's Pacific Office also has put out a new study on information pollution and hate speech in the Pacific. A couple of months ago, just to finish the circuitry of what's been going on in discussions around the region, a couple of months ago, Niue hosted the 7th Pacific Media Summit of the Pacific Islands News Association, or PINA. And the summit theme, a rather heavy one, was charting a resilient future, Pacific media navigating press freedoms, AI disruptions, and geopolitical interests, which is a tall order for media anywhere. Also at that Niue Summit, the first ever Pacific Islands Media Freedom Index 2023 was launched. This covered 12 Pacific countries, with Palau and Niue topping the freedom list. I'm sure that Mr. Kesolei, who's going to be on the panel next, must be proud of that tribute to Palau. Summit participants there were also briefed on the key findings from research conducted by the University of Adelaide, and I think the full report has come out this past month. Some of these findings were that government funding both sustains but at the same time stifles media, that media freedom was a widespread concern, that media self-censorship was more likely in the smaller Pacific countries, and that there is a little bit of engagement with artificial intelligence to help in newsrooms where resources are often scarce. That all sounds fairly grim, so I've just got a few sort of slightly more positive points that also came from my colleagues, the High Commissioners in the Pacific. Just 3 posts, and it was random. It was just the people that I knew well who'd have a real close interest in media. And my colleague in Port Moresby, for example, pointed out that in Papua New Guinea there is a strong tradition historically of a free press, and that there is full reporting of government and opposition issues, including where there's political scandal or corruption to expose. In Fiji, the media has been building back better since the repeal last year of the highly constricting media decree, and the Fijian public can now expect freedom of expression across all of the platforms, print media, visual and social media. Solomon Islands news landscape includes both traditional and non-traditional media, including 2 privately owned newspapers. But as in other parts of the Pacific, radio is still the method that reaches everybody outside the urban centres. A common challenge was mentioned as the loss of advertising revenue from Pacific economies that are still rather struggling to recover from the tail end of the pandemic. And that loss of advertising revenue is certainly a problem in our other countries as well. So turning now to the question of what's needed to strengthen and make Pacific media more resilient, it's always easier, as I'm sure we all appreciate, to define the challenges than to actually devise the solutions. And no doubt there will be good suggestions out of this morning's discussion for what can be done. But from the various Pacific dialogues that I've already referenced, as well as from my diplomatic colleagues, I've pulled together, extracted the following list of recommendations in areas of need. A common theme was the need for international training to compensate for the lack of in-job training or professional skills development for Pacific journalists. This could, for example, be in information gathering or the investigative journalism skills of how to do an interview with somebody who's a senior political figure when it might be kind of difficult for you culturally. At university level, targeted journalism scholarships, which involved international mentoring, were seen as something that would be really helpful. If seasoned journalists offshore could help to produce those work-ready journalism graduates. Another way of doing that would be to offer work placements in newsrooms. New Zealand has done that a little bit. We've used our development assistance funding to fund short-term attachments. One of the areas that my colleagues in the High Commissions pointed out they thought would be a game changer would be funding for local content, because that's a real absence in the Pacific as well, as often have to rely on international sources for their content. Also, because of the growth of internet-based media in recent years, training in how to access digital media would be another productive area. Obviously, traditional media is struggling with cost. Digital can help to get around that constraint. But along with the explosion of digital media comes the explosion of misinformation and disinformation. And another area that's kind of lacking is the ability to do the sort of fact-checking that bigger media organisations, including in the US and Australia, New Zealand, are able to do. So perhaps another area of focus. And finally, the constructive use of artificial intelligence to compensate for the sort of resource-strapped newsrooms that many of the Pacific countries have as part of their media environment. Okay, so I'm going to stop at that point because we want to hear from those in the region who are actually practicing journalists. I'm sure that they're going to have really good suggestions based on their own personal experience as to what would be the best ways to support media in the Pacific in a most effective way. So once again, thank you to CSIS for organising this discussion. I think that around DC there's been a very productive increase in focus on the Pacific over recent years, and a good deal of that we thank CSIS for stimulating. So all the best for this morning's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Banks. Resonant in my mind, in addition to the not one, not two, but 7 different recommendations that you threw out there, is this phrase that I think is really important that we keep with us throughout the day about how a free, vibrant, and open press are champions of and for democracy for all of our countries. To kick things off, to go directly to the region, even if virtually to the region, we're going to have a panel scoping what the media environment looks like in the Pacific and drilling down a little bit on some of the challenges that we find that you heard a little bit about from the outset. I'm thrilled to have Jessica Stone come up here, not virtually, but in person, to chair this panel. Jessica is a Washington-based correspondent for English to Asia VOA's English language affiliate service in the Indo-Pacific. Previously, she served as White House correspondent for CGTN America and has had a long career of reporting on politics and business for a variety of outlets: the South China Morning Post, USA Today, the Washington Times, Fox News, and CBS News. So, Jessica, would you please join us on stage? Join us. Actually, you will be alone on stage as you introduce our very distinguished panel of journalists from the Pacific. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks for having me. So you have to look at me for a few minutes before we introduce you to the esteemed panelists, and I want you to know that they are really grateful for the opportunity to get to talk to you about their everyday lives. I am Jessica Stone, and I work at English to Asia's division within the China branch of Voice of America. And it's really a privilege to explore today with you the nexus between a free media in the Pacific and our common vision of a democratic vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific. You know, around the Pacific Islands, which is a beat of mine now at Voice of America, press freedoms are under pressure, whether it's fire bombings and reporter murders in Papua New Guinea or effective gag orders in Samoa. But there are also stories of victory. In Fiji, for example, as the ambassador alluded to, they were instrumental, journalists were, in getting a law struck down that would have given them 2 years in prison for content judged against the public or national interest. And as she also mentioned, in September, the Pacific Media Freedom Index published the first effort to catalog media freedoms across the Pacific as reported by local journalists. So from their eyes to the report. And that data shows that Palau, Niue, and Cook Islands had the most media freedoms, while Nauru, PNG, and Tuvalu were at the bottom. Here is why I'm interested in this. Here's why the United States needs to be interested in this, and every other Western democracy should care. Freedom of the press is a cornerstone of a free society, and the freedoms of these Pacific Islands are integral to our own Pacific freedoms and to our own freedoms in this country. And here's how. These are tiny islands, but they are strategically located in major shipping lanes that guarantee the free flow of goods to our dinner tables, to our children's Christmas lists. They are also key military staging points in countering any potential act of aggression by China or North Korea. And perhaps most importantly, they are full of freedom-loving people who want to maintain their freedoms to worship, to be informed, especially about climate change, and they want the freedoms to assembly. They want to also decide how they'll interact with the rest of the world on their own terms. They want to maintain their sovereignty. So today, I want to introduce you to some heroes of the Pacific media who are on your screens now. I'm joined very early in the morning. You can see Tevita there in the dark. It is 2 and 3 a.m. in some parts of the world that they're joining us from. First off, we have Tevita Motulalo from Tonga Independent Online. You see him nodding there. He's right, let's see, that way. And then we have Kambes Kesolei from the Palauan newspaper Tia Belau, and Indra Singh from the Fiji Broadcasting Corporation. I'm so glad to have you all. Good to see you on the screen, gentlemen. I want to begin with a broad question to each of you about the need for accurate information sources in the Pacific Islands. If you could each briefly describe the appetite in your countries for news, and what are the topics gaining the most attention, and also what are the platforms that people are using to access information. Tevita, can we start with you?
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for the rest of the panel. For our situation in Tonga, I think our most popular platform is in Tonga is a Tongan platform of Facebook, and I think about 80% of online commentators stick around. There's a lot of banter on Facebook, which adds to the flavor, maybe the value. But in vibrant online discussion room like that, it's also.
I'm gonna move Tevita, not to cut you off, but the technology is cutting you off.
Yes, yeah, I understand. I just saw that. But yeah, so. A lot of the other platforms are there are some following, but not as much as Facebook at the moment here.
And topics quickly. What does everybody want to read about in Tonga or watch?
From church gossip to office gossip to village donations and concerts and all manner of social life is all up in there, including national politics and even some of the more relevant global issues, particularly. But also, we're at the nexus of two very serious security issues of traditional rivalry with China, but also issues of climate change. And on our downtime, when we're not worrying about China, we're worrying about exploding volcanoes and disappearing islands. So yeah, so the media community is very much kept busy almost all year round with all sorts of and the occasional lost boat or downed vessel out in the open ocean, and we share with Fiji, and they'll share their stories as well. But a declining, sorry.
Tevita, I was going to see if we could go to Kambes with the kind of the
Of course.
headlines of the same question.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica, and also to my other colleagues in the region. I think Tevita explained it. What he said is applies to Palau as well. The medium of choice for the Palauans is, of course, the social media, Facebook especially. And as was seen this past elections, most discussions on issues were done in the social media, especially Facebook. And the topic of choice, of course, was the election. That was been like the topic since the beginning of the year. But more so, we have these two things is now seen and been discussed. One is the Palau has adopted this new value-added tax, the VAT system, which was implemented in January 1st of last year. And also the military in Palau, as President Whips has been on the media,
These are the U.S. military.
He's been very
in Palau.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So his and so there's been also concern from the public because even though we have this compact of free association, and it's been the national government discussing about these issues, but now that the military is starting to come into the country, it's the relationship between the military and the community that is going to play out in the years to come, and that's it's been looked at closely how's the relationship is going to play out, because people are looking at Guam, the neighbor island of Guam, and the relationship between the people and the military, which has played out for so many years. So those are the concerns, and I think those are the issues that will continue to be dominating for the years to come as the U.S. expand its presence in the region, especially in Palau.
Kambes, thank you. Indra, you're part of a large broadcasting corporation, so your perspective on platforms is probably a little bit different. Can you talk a little bit about the appetite for the media that you're part of and the topics that you guys cover at FBC?
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Bula, to everybody from Fiji. Pretty early in the morning, but it's always great to get our voices of the Pacific out to everyone, to my panelists, fellow panelists, and also to everyone present. Well, for us, Facebook still remains one of the most go-to platforms in the country, even though I might like to add right about now is that TikTok is really shooting up. More and more of the younger populace are now turning to things like TikTok to get their daily sources of news and other gossip, etc., that they believe in more than traditional media for the past number of years. Facebook is still the highest go-to platform for the Fiji Islanders, particularly from the very young to the older generation. They still, these days, since the past 10, 15 years, it's really gathered momentum, particularly amidst the elections that we've had, the past couple of elections. People have taken to Facebook. Fake news has sort of become, if I may say, real news for most of the users. So hence, they stick to Facebook, traditional media facing that issue at the moment.
And Indra, can I interrupt and just ask, are you pushing back at FBC against that? Are you able to counter some of the narratives that people are talking about from Facebook with the product that you're putting out?
No, most definitely, Jessica. I think it comes back not only to us at FBC, but I think the other media outlets in Fiji and perhaps the Pacific to some extent, where we're trying to get people to come back. And mind you, we've seen some signs of improvement because traditional media will always be traditional media. We'll give you the facts, we'll give you the fact-checked stuff rather than, whatever is put up by anyone and everyone. So it is working, but still a challenge, Jessica. But moving on, the biggest problem Fiji is facing now is the drug problem. I'm not really sure how much the world has come to know of this, but apart
it's
from
all over
climate
your
change,
website. It's almost every story on your website right now has to do with the drug trade. It's really
Yeah,
you're
the drug
covering
trade,
it
the
from
drug
every
trade.
angle.
Yeah, the drug trade is killing the country, and it's sad. We have young people as young as 8 or 9 involved in this now. We hear of stories on a daily basis of parents, giving hard drugs such as meth to young kids to carry, to deliver to people they're selling it to, etc., etc. And it's very sad. And that's what we're trying to, trying our best to try and put it out there through the media narrative to say, this is not right, this is not wrong. But it's pretty late. But now we have to look for ways to try and counter that, to try and educate the younger populace, in particular, those between the age range of perhaps 10 and 20, to try and solve this issue. But yeah, Jessica, as you correctly said, every day there's a drug story that's developing. Not to say those that are not on the forefront of the traditional media. So that's there. Climate change remains. I know you've recently been around and done a great story out of Serua, where you've seen firsthand what climate change is doing to the country. It remains, in the recent COP, once again, failing to really get behind the fight for the island nations and SIDS in particular. So that remains on the forefront as well. And our political situation, which has sort of, leveled off in the past 2-3 years in terms of what's happened, as many of you know. But yeah, those three at the moment are top of the agenda.
All right, I want to move on to what I perceive from what I've seen as obstacles that each of you have in common. And the first one is legal obstacles. Tevita and I were joking, because he is using humor to combat a lot of the things he's up against, that you've described yourself as the most litigated against journalist in all of Tonga, and that there's a price of $1.5 million in damages on your head for defamation lawsuits. I want to just have you describe, how does this affect you personally, financially, and how is it impacting your journalism? These multiple accusations, I think you said you have something like 6 cases you're fighting right now?
Right. And talk about fighting. The other litigating party is a bank, so it's interesting. But we do have to have a bit of a humor to go along with it. I have a good lawyer, and he's a good friend, and he is willing to do this for free.
That is a good lawyer.
Until we're able to, if we are able to recoup the costs from the other side, because we're confident in our situation, but we wear it as a badge of honor to be the most litigated party in journalists, a bunch of journalists in our history. We pride ourselves in our constitution, which enshrines the freedom of the press from 1875. So it's been there, but every once in a while, we can expect and go along with the challenge. But also, the other issue would like to in support of Indra when he's saying that I did kind of missed out on the drug issue there. It's also the same here in Tonga. It's in fact the king. We have a king. Personally came out and called a national meeting and called everybody to have attention, draw attention to the drugs issue and its impact on the youth and the rest of the economy and everybody. But in terms of the legal on the legal side, we're confident in our cases, and it's not necessarily. We don't think these are outrageously personalized stories that we're going after banking mishaps and insider trading issues, generally public issues that the public would be should be aware of, especially for public enterprise like a bank. But also the CEO in question is a former ambassador to China, so I don't know what lessons that she may have learned from being there.
Tevita, just to put a bow on that, you told me last night, and I just want to have everyone hear, what has been the message communicated to the rest of the press because of what you have been going through?
Right, and probably is at the core of all the attempt is to intimidate and to shut off any interest to touch the stories or the issues that they're relevant to or involved in. And I've tried, the Media Association, I literally helped rebuild from scratch. And I'm saying, guys, I think I might need your help with this because this is piling up. Because they're filing claims and they're filing injunctions at the same time, and they're coming multi-pronged, and sometimes 3-4 times a week. But even the Media Association are like backing off with their hands in the air, like, we don't. And so if it's the intention, it's working. Okay. And the rest of the more senior members of the media corps are very reluctant to comment on what the banks is doing. And they actually, one of the officers kind of bragged to me about it. They have an endless amount of money to finance whatever lawyer they need to come after me. And I'm very happy to go for the ride. So here we go.
Kambes, I want to bring you in here because you are part of an organization raising money to help the Island Times in Palau fight a defamation lawsuit. We don't need to get into all the particulars of the case, but defamation lawsuits also a way of silencing the media in Palau?
So currently, one of the country's 2 newspapers is facing a lawsuit. And this lawsuit comes from a company owned by the family of the president of Palau, President Whips. And the lawsuit came just about a week before the presidential election took place on the 5th of November. So this newspaper is Island Times newspaper. And it's facing a defamation and negligence lawsuit stemming from its story analyzing the leaked tax records that were circulating on the Facebook. And the president's family's company came out issuing a press release condemning such act of leaking the tax records. Now, so Island Times took this press release and the tax records that are circulating on social media, especially on Facebook, and then wrote a story based on this press release, and then went on and did the analysis because it was an important part of the story for the people to know because as I mentioned earlier that the new tax that just came on the value-added tax, and both opposing campaign, presidential campaign, took a different way of trying to win the people's hearts on this new tax. President Whip's side was to say that this tax. I'm sorry. I'll go back. President Tremangsao. Sure, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to get to the impact of this on the Island Times. You obviously had to raise money to help them fight this lawsuit.
Oh, sure.
What financial position does this leave them in? Is it changing the way they do journalism? Is it communicating any sort of, to the rest of the media that they shouldn't tell tough stories?
No, I mean, we just continue to do as we did before the lawsuit, just continue to write stories and report them as they are. But what is really concerning is that this is a $70 million company, one of the largest company on the island.
Yeah, they're going to have deep pockets, right?
Right. So they can, we are very confident that we're going to win this lawsuit. But because they have deep pockets, they can drag this on, and eventually can bankrupt the company. And the company is part of a group of a smaller companies that makes up the PRA company. And they've closed most of their business. They have fish market and
well, it's not a fair
gas
fight
stations.
financially, right? Because
it's not a fair fight, and it's really hard for them to afford a lawyer. So we had to come in. It's not really to help the Island Times, but the overall idea of protecting our freedom of the press. That's basically what it is.
And you've been really proud of your freedoms, Kambes. You've been proud of the legal underpinnings of Palauan media freedom, which is why you are at the top of that list.
Yes. But Ambassador Banks earlier said that we were the top ranking with Niue on the Pacific Freedom Forum Index. I don't think it's going to be the same next year because with this lawsuit, it's going to drop our rankings. But anyway, we are really fighting to protect that what we have in our constitution that is there to protect the freedom of the press, and especially for the citizens to be able to access and review the government documents. That's basically what it is, and we are trying to protect that. This, if we somehow we're going to lose this case, it's going to cast a chilling effect, not only from the print journalism.
That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, chilling effect. That's what I was wondering. Indra, can I move to you, because you've not only fought at the civil litigation level, you fought at the government litigation level with this law that the media gathered to overturn from 2023. I know it's a long story, and we certainly don't have the time to go through the TikTok, but I want you to just focus, if you can, on what you believe broke the logjam. What was it that convinced the administration to change the law and basically give you back your rights to report free and fair and to be subject to the basically evaluation of the public rather than the government based on that?
Yeah, Jessica, I think it was after a very long time, the unity in the media fraternity in Fiji through the Fijian Media Association, which has done some fantastic work, which I'm very proud to be part and parcel of. I think the pressure put on and the noises made by the FMA with all the media houses together as one did have some impact, mind you, but credit to the new government that came in 2 years ago, 2 years to later this month. It was part of the manifesto and part of the election promise that they were going to repeal all the media decrees, etc., that were in place, the harsh act that would send journalists to prison, editors, etc., and companies fined almost about $1 million Fijian if found guilty of issues and reporting, etc. So I think the combination of unity and the push from the Fijian media circles to have free and fair reporting has resulted in where we are today. But mind you, I'd just like to quickly touch on the aspect people are still living, particularly the young journalists, and we have a lot of young journalists present in different newsrooms in our country. They're still living in that sort of mindset where they still are very much hesitant to break these shackles and totally take the shackles off and do free and fair reporting, investigative journalism, etc. It will take time for the mindset to change, but we are very much confident it will. But what we've picked up as well is some of the other Pacific countries have started following Fiji's past media laws and acts, and they are implementing it. So that, whoever
Meaning
does
the
go down
restrictive
that path,
ones. They're following the restrictive policies?
Yeah, the restrictive one policies.
So they're going in the reverse.
Yeah, they are, and I see that some of the Pacific countries are contemplating or down the path of doing that. I tell you what, that is not going to help drive a free and fair media. It is only going to hold back media, and you'll really not know the true story and picture of what's happening in each of these individual countries. Jess.
So you touched a little bit on self-censorship. That's another obstacle that the media reporting has unveiled. But I don't want to delve too far into that, because I think you've outlaid a little bit of the kind of population of younger reporters, which, that's having been one myself, that's an age when you are more hesitant about a lot of things in life, not just your reporting. The other major obstacle I want to address with all of you is the economic one. That was the single largest thing that was identified by the Pacific Media Freedom, citing economic need at the top of the list. And, obviously, we've heard about programs from the ambassador, and there are programs that the United States does. But I want to hear what you think would be helpful, because I have heard some of you be critical about the excessive availability of training. Because training, I've heard you say, actually helps young journalists leave the patch much more easily. And so because you don't want to lose journalists, you do want them to be trained. There are other ideas that you have about the kinds of technical assistance, technological assistance that you might benefit from to keep journalists in your country. Can you address that, Indra? Why don't I start with you? I know you have a lot of journalists under your wing, so.
Thanks. Yeah, look, training, I very much, appreciative of every training opportunity that comes our way. But the question is, what does this training actually bring with it? So, not naming names, but we've had countries offer us training, but from their own perspective with their own agenda. And when that happens, I feel that it is not really trying to develop our people, but in turn, it is trying to develop us into becoming sort of their foot soldiers in reporting what they'd want to see. So that's very important for us to keep tabs on actually what type of training are we taking up and taking on board. Going back to the economic situation, I think we all are facing, and not only smaller newsrooms, I think everyone around the world in the media fraternity are facing a lot of issues post-COVID, post-pandemic, whereby we've lost, those revenue dollars, those advertising dollars, those input in terms of putting in money to the certain aspects of the operations of a media company. So those are the things that we are facing challenges with. Training as well, I'm a firm believer of long-term training. I do not believe in 2-3 days workshop trainings that sometimes are conducted because you really don't get a decent outcome of it. You just have 3 days of sitting around and perhaps just trying to get adapted to what is being put out there. A more long-term digital training, etc. A more long-term training on digital media and on climate change, etc. does reap the benefits because we have people who pick up more from that. And also, I think a lot of our Pacific journalists, and I talk for Fiji, where we have a lot of young people and they need exposure, and we need to be having the very best people, trying to talk to them, trying to sort of guide them and mentor them. And mentorship training, I totally agree on with some of my colleagues back here in Fiji, is something that takes care of 70% of what we're trying to achieve. Once you've got good mentorship and you've got good mentors to help you, we can fight this problem of not being able to acquire a lot of the other training, etc., because this mentorship program automatically lifts the game. That's what we've noticed. So that's where we stand. But overall, in terms of training, firm believer that it's got to be long-term rather than just a short-term and a couple of days. And it's got to cut out the agenda of any individual country, nation, or organization that comes on board to provide the journalist a chance to enhance their skills.
Just on the finance side, the financial need is being met largely by advertisers, right? For all of you, or by subscribers. Some of you have subscriber models, some of you have advertising models. But isn't the government one of the largest advertisers for all of you? And how does that present a challenge? Kambes, do you want to pick up there?
It's true here that the government is the major advertising clients for the newspapers, not only for the newspapers, but also the radio. But it's been going down. The ad revenue from the governments has been going down, and it's just the difference between the administrations that come in. So the last administration would come in, and then every major national holidays, they would buy a full-page color ad. But this administration now don't do that. They say we have to cut advertising dollars because we don't have any revenue out of COVID economy. And so what?
Kambes,
Yeah, go ahead.
can I have you draw
Sure.
the line between are you getting pressure because you're accepting revenue from the government to be more hands-off with certain government-related stories? Even if they're not giving you pressure, do you feel pressure or do you self-censor?
No, we're just going to. Okay, so for the newspaper environment, so they are part of a family business that they are cross-subsidized. So, for example, if the newspaper that I'm working on lose revenue, then the income from the other businesses within this company would help subsidize. So that's it's operate even without the government full support, especially if they have to cut that. So there's kind of buffer us protecting us from the government if they do decide to cut the ad revenue, because we're not publishing stories that they want to see. But the thing is, it's not enough that we can afford to hire new people to come in, because the government will always pay lots of money. So we have new communication journalist graduates from the university coming to Palau, but it's the government that gets them to the government. And then
so your financial impact is because the government can pay employees better. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So if you could pay people competitively, that would be to your benefit.
I mean, that's what it's right now. It's like there's like 3, or I would say 4 full-time newspaper writers between the two companies. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we cannot just continue to do this. We need to bring in more people and then work them until they reach this level that they can, maybe we can move on to do some things, and then they can take over the business of journalism.
Well, and one of the ways that you're affording to do the work that you do, Kambes, is that you have another job, and
right,
your main job.
And that's and that's very true, because depending on a sole income from the newspaper or journalism work is not enough to support your livelihood. Yeah. The reason I'm also doing environmental assessment on the side, and then I do photography. So those are the side income that I'm also putting out my skills out there to make money, to supplement my journalism income. And otherwise, I would not be doing this journalism if I would not have any other skills to depend on. So it's also partly it's a labor of love. So it's really up to the person, like how much they would like to contribute back to their island. So that's kind of like how I see my role in the media.
Tevita, I want to bring in your interesting model of being both a think tank researcher, which pays the bills, and a journalist. And, that's something I've met. There's someone else in our audience today who has followed that, maybe pioneered that model. And it's an interesting one. Can you talk a little bit about the way that helps your journalism, the way that it obviously financially supports you and your family?
To be frank, it really doesn't support anything, but it financially.
I wasn't expecting that answer, Tevita.
but I feel it's an approach that had to be taken, because I did studies in security and geopolitics, so I had been in that environment. But when I came back, I saw that there's a lack of resources for everybody, including the media, for policy research and explanation to even the policymakers themselves, let alone the media and the rest of the public. And the media is an important conduit for sharing information with the public. So I had to share my footing and try to collaborate and do more stuff, and to work with other researchers from abroad who also have side jobs as writing articles for journals or news outlets, and sometimes ask for republication of their articles or commentaries on existing issues that are here on the ground. But I feel that's a very very helpful step to have for the journalist communities, because we don't necessarily have a huge archive, let alone a fully functioning newsroom. I mean, I start now telling people that when they get telling organizations and other state funded trainers coming in. If you have to send a trainer to come in, can you imagine the entire package of expenses that you're using? It's probably 20,000. That's worth more than all the equipment in some of the newsrooms we have here. So if you could just not come and buy some of them cameras or laptops. I'm sitting here and calling you guys on my phone. So
it's a great picture too.
It would have been a lot more. So we'll keep research and catching up on major issues coming up, but also there are real challenges to handle, like financial or even restructuring the banks to help the media and the financial sector to make sure there's available resources for the media. So we need help in those areas, but for every other 3 months, like my colleague has said, that they keep turning up and highlighting any particular side issue that we're going to look at this for now, and we're going to waste a whole week going and doing that, when we are already understaffed and under-resourced to do whatever we need to do to keep bread on the table. But yeah, back to your point, the whole point of a think tank is not necessarily just for the sake of research on policy issues in the region or nationally, but also as a resource hub for the public and the media as well to take advantage when they need.
You raised with the bank reforms an interesting point about ways that other countries can be of assistance, and that's in maybe technical assistance or bringing in expertise of that nature. Is that something all of you see a need for in the region? Indra?
Yeah, absolutely. If it helps us not rely on government too much and fight over it, because that governments also do that intentionally. If you're too unfriendly, we'll forget about you in the next round of bids for advertising or whatever. But if there's an alternative avenue for capital, and we're jealous of U.S. risk capital ecosystem and the technology. Very helpful. Very helpful for even, I think yesterday, Starlink announced their mobile to satellite connectivity capabilities are coming up. So in a new batch of satellites being brought up. So that's for isolated, fragmented communities like the Pacific is perfect. When Starlink is announced, it was.
My understanding, though, is that there's a debate in the region about the use of Starlink versus Chinese technology, right? And so that's also playing out based on people's choices. Does anybody want to weigh in on that? The competition between Huawei and Starlink in the region for helping you do what you do best?
Yeah, I'd just like to come into that. That takes me back to the unfortunate Tongan volcano and tsunami, which we had a year or two ago. I think the question is best answered, what helped? And I think Starlink at that time set up its base in Fiji and then helped Tonga. And now Starlink has taken off in Fiji. Mind you, our own companies now are using more of the Starlink technology that helps us go live, etc., from certain places, even though the costs do play a major role. And this whole geopolitics and the political football of China and versus the rest of the world, I might stick my neck out here, and sometimes I think it plays into the hands of these smaller nations, because then what we've seen is smaller nation leaders trying to, get the best of both worlds. So that also brings us the question of actually where the loyalties lie, etc. And at the moment, I think many of the Pacific Island nations have got that going with both of the nations. It's called diplomacy, of course, but some with one party more than the other. And I think it just shows us that whatever is brought to the table for the small island developing states, they'll grab it with both hands. but you got to also be careful in the repercussions that come with it, and that is what ties it to the media, where, believe me, our media house has been offered assistance from countries which we have, very politely said no to, because we know in 10, 15 years time, or maybe less than that, what we'll have to pay back with interest, if I may say so, in terms of where we'll end up and what we'll end up doing. So, yeah, it's very interesting days, but I think political leaders are playing a very important role in trying to have the best of both worlds at times, which impacts its people and the and media outlets alike.
Kambes, I want to bring you in here because, of course, Taiwan is recognized uniquely by Palau in the region. There are a few other Pacific Island states that still recognize Taiwan. But I'm wondering, in this U.S.-China geological context about freedom versus communism, how much of that is playing out in Palau from a media perspective? Are you, or even in this military presence discussion you're having, or in the technology you use, as Indra mentioned?
Yeah, so what we have from the media is more about this U.S. military presence on the island, and especially with President Quibbs having invited the U.S. military to deploy their missile batteries on the island. That's kind of like started, even though it started with the previous administration in inviting the U.S. military to establish the dual-use facilities under the Compact of the Association. But then this president is more gung-ho about bringing in the military. And so it's part of what he's saying as presence and deterrence. So for our media, as we do a story on the geopolitics, it's always about this U.S. military that is now being seen in expanding its presence on the island. And especially with Palau, Palauans are really recognize their strategic value in terms of the U.S. homeland security, and that's always put Palauans and with our proximity to the China and Taiwan, we are pretty much in there when it comes to geopolitical discussions, and so it's always in the context of that. And with the regular Palau's regular engagements with Japan, Taiwan, and the other Australia as well. So it's fairly common, especially from the community, to hear people talk about geopolitics, because we know that there's only Tuvalu, the Marshall Islands, and Palau that remain as countries in the Pacific that recognize Taiwan diplomatically. And so yes, it's there, but it's always in the context of is how much is the U.S. military presence going to increase in the coming years. That's always where we are, and that's how the local media is presenting this issue.
Okay, we're going to get to audience questions in just a moment. I want to just wrap up here with one last question to each of you, and I found the technology piece really interesting. But if there was one need that you have that the U.S. government should know about to empower a free press in your country, maybe one that they haven't heard about before, and that is not a blank check, but some kind of idea that you have, a need that you've identified, what would it be? Can I start with you, Tevita?
Well, that's a bit of a... Well, there is a cost. There's a cost to the loss of free expression in free press. And we're sometimes we're too caught up in trying to sort out political correctness, but as long as people are able to communicate and talk to each other and share views and whatnot, that's the very start of it. It helps to have a sense of community and build trust. And trust in institutions are very big issue now, but it has to start somewhere. But it's also not free. So there is some cost to it. Yeah.
Indra, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot that's done. I think resources, it's been spoken about before, even though it's not a new topic. I feel like now more than ever, with the development in terms of technology and where we are and what's being used around the world, making things relatively easier for the journalists. I think technology is a place where a leading nation like US could play a major part in, and my friend from Tonga spoke about it, how a simple laptop can make a big difference. And for most around the world, for the bigger nations, it would be a laptop doesn't really, sometimes you don't think of it because it's readily available to you, but for us in the islands, to have things like a laptop and a phone to do a mobile journalism reporting, that's something that really does take us a long way. So yeah, it's not a new need, new want, but I feel, if there's an area that could be looked at to help, it will take us a long way. And of course, just to touch on the system, the Pacific, to be able to combat fake news through fact-checking and assisting with experts in terms of training our people to be able to do fact-checking at a very rigorous level, so we are able to take on the growing threat of social media, which is posing a big issue to traditional media at the moment, Jess.
Yeah. Kambes?
Actually, we've been, the Palauan Media Council has been discussing this even before the lawsuit. And we would, if we have something in place, you would like to have that a legal person or a legal entity that, that could provide us guidance as we develop a story, because some of the stories, we would like to consult with that attorney or, to see that can we go ahead and do this story and without any legal repercussions to later that we would face. I think that would be a very good, what do you call it? Assistance that the Palau media...
Legal aid or some kind of legal guidance.
Legal aid,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, and of course, someone that's familiar with Palauan law, which would be helpful. I want to get to some questions from the audience now. Thank you, gentlemen. And Tevita, I know you're not feeling 100%, so thanks for joining us. He's actually got COVID, folks, and he still made it happen for you today. This is from Melino Maka from the Tonga Independent, so Tonga representing this morning. She's got a couple of questions here. I'm just going to look through. Here's one that I think is interesting. What role can Pacific leaders play in improving media access to information about policy decisions, ensuring transparency, and building trust between media and governments? And I wonder, how much trust is there to begin with? Has it increased, for example, in Fiji since you've gotten increased transparency and increased rights back? Indra, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, well, sure. Just I think the trust has sort of started to come back. It's not there fully 100%, but it has. Just to answer that question, I think all across Pacific, our leaders got to be more honest and open and true to their word. We can't hear one thing today and it changes tomorrow, and that's the biggest challenge that we face in the Pacific. And they got to be ready to face the robust questions, etc., that gets thrown their way. They have to be consistent. You can't just pay lip service and expect everyone around the world to look at you and think, yeah, you're a big media advocate. Cut out the lip service and get on with the action.
Can I have you each weigh in really quickly with one last question that she has about giving journalists more ability to critically analyze and challenge government policies when there's so much geopolitical pressure and attention on each of your countries, maybe more from the rest of the world than you've felt before? Real quick. It's a huge question, so you get 2 seconds to answer it. Tevita, do you want to take that?
What's the question again? Sorry. I couldn't really...
I'm going to go to Kambes because I think he heard me better. Kambes, do you want to take that one? just what is the imperative, and how can Pacific media balance the need to critically inform while facing increasing geopolitical pressure? Nobody's stepping in here. Maybe that's a stumper, something that we all need to work on together. Tevita, did you have a thought on that?
Well, it's a bit of it is a advanced kind of thinking, but in our case, is why we kind of dovetail think tank work and media work. At least so we're trying to do this out of Tonga first, but we're trying to get partners from across the islands. But to dovetail the relationship, because so where journalists and writers need help, that the think tank researchers can help untangle and explain and ease that pressure.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Well, we've got a lot of think tankers here in the room, so I'm sure they're ready to help in case you need anything.
Right.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. I hesitate to cut off what's been a great conversation for all of us this morning. If anybody wants to follow up with you, I'll make sure they have a way to do so, and we hope to keep the conversation going. We're going to take a break now, and then we're going to bring back three folks from the U.S. government who are all eager to talk about the solutions that they can provide and the problems that they're facing in the media landscape in the Pacific. Thanks again, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
welcome back. We will kick off the second panel now in our media conference today. Thank you all again for joining, both online and in person. We're really pleased to have a distinguished panel today to discuss, really drill down on a little bit of what the U.S. government is doing in the media space in the Pacific and how we are coordinating amongst ourselves and with partners and allies to bolster the free and open media in the Pacific Islands region. We had a very interesting first panel discussion with three media professionals from the Pacific Islands region. I think we heard quite a few very astute recommendations, such as the challenges of litigation being used to stifle free and open media in the Pacific, challenges on the economic front in terms of having sufficient training for media professionals, but also sufficient avenues for pursuing media careers back in their home countries as well. And then the need for just on-the-ground technical assistance, computers, cameras, the ability to navigate the complex social media landscape that is so prevalent around the world, but especially in the Pacific Islands region. So with that in mind, I'm very pleased to welcome three panelists here for our second panel. Sara Borodin is the Deputy Assistant Administrator for East Asia and the Pacific in USAID's Bureau for Asia, where she oversees programs across the region. Since joining USAID in 2001 as a Presidential Management Fellow, she has held key roles, including Acting Deputy Assistant Administrator for Asia and Office Director for Middle East Affairs, managing budgets exceeding $1 billion for operations in Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, the West Bank, and Gaza. She previously worked with think tanks and NGOs focused on the Middle East. Camille Dawson is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Global Public Affairs at the U.S. Department of State, which she assumed in November of 2024. A career member of the Senior Foreign Service, she has held a variety of high-level public diplomacy, political, and consular roles across the Department of State's regional departments, including Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of East Asia and Public Affairs, Counselor for Public Affairs and Acting Deputy Chief of Mission at U.S. Embassy Singapore, and the Africa Regional Media Hub Director in Johannesburg, South Africa. Joan Mower is Director of Business Development at the U.S. Agency for Global Media, USAGM, overseeing partnerships with 5,000 global broadcasters and digital platforms, including Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, Radio TV Marti, and the Middle East Broadcasting Corporation. Previously, she served as USAGM's Public Relations Director and a State Department spokesperson on Sudan issues. Earlier roles include directing international programs at the Freedom Forum Newsroom and working as a journalist for the Associated Press. So thank you all for joining us here today. So we heard from the first panel some really significant challenges facing the Pacific media, in the broader Pacific media landscape. I'd like to turn to each of you in turn, and then we'll have an open discussion, and I'll go out to the audience for some questions as well. Sara, I'd like to start with you. Clearly, USAID is a major player in the region and beyond when it comes to development assistance. Could you elaborate a bit on how USAID is viewing the Pacific media space and what efforts are currently underway?
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you, Kathryn, for inviting me here today. It's a privilege to be part of this important discussion. So I think as has been acknowledged already today, I understand, we know that the Pacific Islands face a growing threat, and that's the proliferation of disinformation and misinformation, largely from the PRC. This, coupled with a low media literacy and overt government influence, threatens independent journalism and transparent governance throughout the region. At USAID, we're committed to bolstering media resilience in the region. We've seen time and time again that independent media and investigative journalism are crucial to countering disinformation and to holding powers accountable. We also know that this is an ongoing struggle. We ourselves are still trying to figure out the best way to respond to a disinformation campaign that was lodged against USAID in the Solomon Islands. So very much looking forward to hearing from our audience today, because we ourselves are trying to figure out the best way to handle this situation. And this is why the strategy we have for the Pacific charts a path towards bolstering institutions in the region that promote transparency and citizen responsiveness. And one of the important lines of effort here is strengthening media capacity. And we do this by supporting journalists through fellowships, through training, master classes, by partnering with local media associations. We're also working to empower journalists to conduct in-depth investigations on critical issues that range from human trafficking to government corruption. We're also focused on improving the digital infrastructure. And I think about a year ago, our ambassador in Fiji launched the Digital Cyber Connectivity Partnership in the Pacific. Together with Japan and Australia, USAID is supporting Palau's second fiber optic cable. This is essential infrastructure that ensures that journalists have reliable internet access. The connectivity is essential for their work and for citizens to access diverse information sources. In this way, we're working to ensure that citizens across the Pacific are connected, even in remote communities. And as we work to connect unserved and underserved communities across the region, we're also building digital skills. To this end, USAID also promotes media literacy. We recently developed a media literacy course for journalists and influencers in Fiji and Solomon Islands, which equips professionals to identify and counter disinformation. Journalists were able to put this training into practice ahead of elections in both countries. And finally, we're working to overcome the challenges of geography and access to the region. We're working with leading civil society and investigative journalists to provide mentorship, skill development, and networking opportunities between newsrooms across the Pacific. These projects are in relatively early stages, so we look forward to hearing more from you so you can help us with our efforts as we continue to expand our programs in general, but particularly in the media landscape for this discussion in the Pacific. We're trying to be extremely intentional about our approach to the Pacific and really work with the local organizations in the Pacific way. We like to say we seek to listen, partner, and deliver, to not only build on goodwill, but also to drive forward the region's own vision for a sustainable future. I'm very much looking forward to today's discussion. I hope that we'll be able to brainstorm on some new ideas together and how we can promote independent journalism, reduce malign external influence on the media landscape in the region, and increase community access to free and unbiased media. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Camille, perhaps I could turn to you next. You have extensive experience in public diplomacy throughout the world. What are your thoughts on how the U.S. can and should be bolstering independent media in the Pacific, and how is the State Department looking at this challenge?
Great, yeah. Thank you, Kathryn, and thanks to everyone for being here, both in person and online. Really appreciate the attention to this important topic. Let me speak a little bit about what the State Department is seeking to do with our public diplomacy operations and programs in the Pacific Islands region, and then a little bit maybe also about how we are working together with the interagency and allies and partners in this space. So from the State Department perspective, we are focused on articulating our foreign policy to public audiences across the Pacific Islands. We are also focused on countering foreign information manipulation and interference through putting out a proactive and affirmative message. And we are using our public diplomacy programs to build capacity in the information environment in hopes of bolstering both the ability to get out an accurate narrative as well as to counter those disinformation or information manipulation efforts. So to state the obvious, we do believe that the Pacific Islands are really a critical region that have been a focus of influence by many actors, and ensuring that there is a stable information environment is really key in the overall effort. The U.S. government's Pacific Partnership Strategy guides our approach to the region and is in line also with our broader Indo-Pacific strategy. But the important element, which Sara referenced also, is really listening to the needs as articulated by the Pacific Islands themselves and understanding the ways in which we can most effectively support those needs, either the U.S. government or collectively with like-minded partners, both governmental and across a whole of society. We know that having an expanded presence from the U.S. government on the ground is important in understanding what those needs are, what priorities are. So we have been very pleased to be able to expand our physical presence. We now have 10 embassies operating in the Pacific Islands, and just in recent year or so have opened public diplomacy operations in the Solomon Islands, Tonga, Vanuatu, and Samoa. And having these on-the-ground operations is really important in enabling us to understand the information environment and the ways in which we can most effectively communicate with audiences. And that differs tremendously from place to place. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. In some places, we know that communicating via radio may be the most effective methodology. In other places, it may be, individual interactions, person-to-person contact directly with media or with influencers. Could be through social media. It all really depends, and therefore having local expertise, particularly in the form of our locally engaged staff at our embassies, is incredibly important. The public diplomacy programs that we run in the Pacific Islands that are focused on media capacity building and bolstering the strength of the information environment range. We have things like exchange programs, such as the International Visitor Leadership Program, our Foreign Press Center reporting tours. We have the Young Pacific Leaders Program, which we're very pleased we've been able to get increased funding for to expand that program in the coming year. Just as an example, we recently held a workshop for 30 participants in the Young Pacific Leaders Program that was held in Tonga, that was focused on capacity building in media literacy and journalism, and that training was provided by U.S. and international experts. But of course, there are many challenges that exist in this space across the Pacific region. Many of the media outlets are very small, have limited financial resources, and are therefore susceptible to financial incentives from actors, adversarial or not. And we have seen the tactics of adversarial actors evolve and become more sophisticated, moving into such things as, ownership structures of media outlets, paid content that is not reflected as such. There are all sorts of tactics that we have seen increasingly used, and a growing concern about information manipulation overall. Sarah made reference to the case in the Solomon Islands with that purported that U.S. aid was actively interfering in the elections through the use of a doctored letter and other things along those lines. So we across the U.S. government are looking at our collective resources and how we can best utilize those resources to support capacity building across the information environment, everything from training in financial planning and revenue generation for media outlets to access to quality, accurate content that media outlets can use at their own discretion. When we provide access to content, we are very careful to ensure that editorial selection is completely up to the outlets themselves to make. We do not push or require content use in any way. And importantly, we are focused on coordinating with like-minded partners. We have done this through a number of fora, working with, for example, countries in Europe and across the Indo-Pacific region to get a sense of what kind of capacity building training and resources they are providing, sharing the information about what we are providing so that collectively we can, hopefully start to fill those gaps as have been identified by the region itself. And lastly, I'll just say that our own approach in the U.S. government to getting out an accurate story or accurate information about what we are doing is focused on pushing out and making available to audiences fact-based information about what we are doing. We know it's important that that be sustained and that we are also aligning with like-minded countries in the region. And we are focused also on delivering messages that are about what the United States is for, what we can offer to the region by offering concrete benefits. And that's a much more effective message than what we are against or who we are against, or trying to go message by message to counter individual bits of disinformation or misinformation. So I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Camille. Joan, I'm really curious about your perspective here, given that your experience overseeing a vast amount of broadcasting activity, both in the Pacific and beyond. As a media professional yourself, how do you view the U.S. efforts in the region, especially given what we've just heard in the first panel and some of the challenges? Are we collaborating sufficiently internally and with other partners? And where do you think we're falling short, if at all?
Well, let me start by first saying I think that the focus on the Pacific has been incredibly beneficial to our agency. I would say that the U.S. Agency for Global Media really, the Pacific Islands was kind of an afterthought until a couple of years ago. And now, with the focus of the U.S. government on the region, we have really taken a number of steps to bolster, to use Camille's word, our presence, our brand, what we're doing, and how we're doing it. And I'm going to start right first by explaining how we are a U.S. government agency, U.S. Agency for Global Media. We work closely with the State Department, we work closely with AID, but we are absolutely different from these organizations. We really have one role, which is to deliver content, news content, which is the Voice of America is our flagship, of course. Jessica Stone, who was moderating the early panel, has been very involved in delivering content, developing content, reaching out to new ways of getting stories. And then we also have another part of our organization, which is even more independent. It's Radio Free Asia. They are actually a nonprofit organization, and they have a product called Benar News, which has done some amazing work in the Pacific. They've actually got 8 stringers across the Pacific region. They've got an office in Brisbane. So really, we're aggressively tackling the need for content that fits the region. And it would be no secret that in Pacific Islands, they're not really interested. They're probably interested in Elon Musk's visit to the Hill, and we were hoping he would be here to pitch Starlink to us. But they're really not interested in what's going on with the Iowa farmers. They want to know what's happening in the Pacific. And so we've upped our game in terms of delivering fact-based news and information to the region, which is our core mission, and that's what we do, and that's what the government pays for. And it's great. I mean, we're a trusted source, and that's our brand. And I urge everyone to go to our website, VOA News, Benar News, take a look at what we produce, and you'll see. So how do we distribute our content? Because our people have mentioned, our panelists have mentioned that there's a very diffuse system of people getting information in an incredibly spread out region, which is impossible to get to. And so what we're doing is we have a system of finding partners. And pleased to say that one of our key partners in the region was from Fiji Broadcasting Corporation. So what we do is we form partnerships with organizations. Our content is free. That is our selling value. You have our free content. You don't have to pay for it. You can download it, use it all you want. And so that's what we're basically offering. We are also, and we've formed partnerships really with major broadcasters around the region. And more recently, we have developed a partnership, and I'm looking at the ambassador here, with a fantastic organization in New Zealand called Pacifica TV, which is funded by the New Zealand government, and they have relationships with stations all over the region. They now take our content and they distribute it all over the region to TV stations, digital stations, radios. They're mainly video, but although we are radio, digital, and television. So it's this idea of working with organizations in the region to get content delivered. Internet, of course, is key. I was fascinated by this idea that 80% of people in these regions are on internet. That was an amazing statistic to me. As to your question, are we doing enough? We probably are. I think both of our panelists here talked about baby steps. I think the State Department and AID are really exploring different paths. I know State Department at one point was providing Associated Press content to stations across the region, which I thought was actually a great idea because there's a dearth of news and information in these regions. Are we coordinating enough? No. Is the government ever coordinating enough? I would say no, absolutely not. I really welcome having our panelists up here. I really support CSIS, and I hope we can move even to a further level where we're literally looking at where is the money going and how are we working together to make sure that this is taking care of what our panelists talked about, which is the need for investigative reporting. Again, one of the ways that our agency, which does do training, by the way, we have a training division, which I actually head. One of the things that we're trying to do with investigative reporting, because we understand how difficult it is for the locals to do investigative reporting, particularly if they're, as Jessica pointed out, getting advertisement from the government. So what we do is we try to put you in touch with other organizations, such as the International Journalist Investigative Network, IGIN, the Global Journalist Investigative Network. A lot of the great investigative international reporting is now being done by international and regional organizations. So you're not alone in this job. And I think of the Panama Papers, which I hope you've all heard about, which basically broke massive stories all over the world by having a group of journalists look at certain companies and what they were doing. So we're trying to work regionally with groups. In terms of training, our panelists also mentioned the whole idea of sort of dropping in, flying out, saying goodbye. Hey, we had a nice time in Fiji for 3 days. That's not going to work. So what we're actually trying to do is we're working right now with Pacifica to create co-productions where our team works with their team on stories of great interest. The military in Palau would be one. There's a huge interest in sports. There's a number of Pacific Islanders who are well known in the American sports world. That's an area. Gender, health, climate change. These are all areas that we're trying to actually work with them on stories. Training on digital, yes, absolutely important. We typically don't provide, our agency doesn't provide technology. We're looking at AID to do that. Thank you. So I'll end there. I could talk forever, as you can see. So I'll let other people talk. But yeah, I think my takeaway is I think we're super excited, really excited about this this whole new part of the world that we're discovering and spending some time and focusing on. And thanks to CSIS too.
Thank you, Joan. That was really great. And it teased me into my first question to you all, which one of the things we heard in the first panel was the challenge often faced by the Pacific they have a great need for, of course, training of young journalists. And there are many training opportunities that are provided. Probably we could have many more. But one challenge that often occurs is you might train up young journalists, but then because there is not necessarily a viable path for a media professional in these countries, they also might then leave and go to other countries, New Zealand, Australia, the US, and pursue media professions there. How do we make that connectivity there? And are we considering ways to not just help provide training for young journalists, but help them see a viable path economically for pursuing media profession in countries? And how do we think about that problem? Maybe Sarah, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I could start. In my remarks, I focused on what we're doing in the media sector, but that is just one part of the U.S. government's approach to the Pacific and to USAID strategy in the Pacific. So we are also extremely focused on economic growth opportunities and understanding that you need to create jobs. People need to have sustainable lifestyles so that they can stay and they can thrive and flourish in their countries. So we have a number of programs focused on trying to work in that sector, whether it's agriculture or fishing or working in a variety of sectors. So that's, I think, a really important part is that to look at our program more holistically in terms of all the pieces we're working on. Also, lots of programs focused on the issue of climate, which one cannot overlook when it comes to the Pacific being very much an existential threat to many of the countries we work with there. We also really focus on working with local organizations and working on sustainability for those organizations so that, I think as Joan mentioned, it's not that we're plopping in and then just leaving, but how can we make sure these organizations can be financially sustainable after whatever type our assistance that we're providing after we move on. So that's a key part of how USAID approaches our work throughout the world, and that includes in the Pacific, is trying to build up the capacity of whether it's the local government or local civil society organizations or media organizations, that they can be self-sufficient and hopefully be able to continue to fund media programs and fund the journalists to stay in the country. And then that coupled, like I said, started with my remarks, with our larger focus on economic growth opportunities throughout the countries we work in.
Thank you. Camille, to put a finer point on what Sarah was just saying, how is the State Department looking at this, and are there ways that we can help foster a viable media enterprise within each of these countries so that young journalists who want to be able to report honestly and fairly on what's going on have a place to land?
Yes, well, I would certainly echo all the points that Sarah made about this, is only a subset of the much larger goals around economic growth and development opportunities that we as the U.S. government as a whole, in coordination with like-minded partners, are really seeking to advance. But when we think about some, specific programmatic, let's say, opportunities, we, in preparing for a suite of programs recently, put out a call to media outlets across the Indo-Pacific region, not only in the Pacific Islands, but more broadly, and asked, what are the real needs that they see? Where do they most need support? And the most frequent responses and requests for support were related to training around how to generate revenue for media outlets and to enable longer-term financial sustainability of the outlets. That was very high up on the list. Additionally, it was request for access to content as well as training in how to actually put that content to use. So just receiving access to content, whether from the U.S. or any other country, is not sufficient, right? In the deluge of things that people are working through, they needed to be able to understand how to most effectively use that, and then also how to tie that to the broader picture of engaging the audience and turning that into greater revenue generation. And then lastly, and this was referenced already, the need for equipment, physical items like cameras, computers, access to software and databases, those kinds of things. So through our programs, we are seeking to provide some of that. But of course, the reality is that we are only able financially to meet a small portion of that need. So that is certainly why we on the State Department side are engaging with like-minded partners to try to share information about what each of us is able to provide so that collectively we are able to meet more of the need. But we have a long ways to go in that regard. But we will continue to make those efforts to see, how we can, from the U.S. side, for example, identify we are going to provide, this training, these resources to these 30 outlets in these countries. And, look to you, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, European partners, et cetera. What are you able to provide? And then sort of putting that together into a broader map and seeking to address the most pressing needs. But that's very much an ongoing effort and a long-term effort for which, we will need a lot of support from many actors globally.
Thank you. Joan, along with that, we also heard from some of our panelists earlier that need for mentorship and continued mentorship for these young journalists. Curious your thoughts on both what was just said about the need for greater media viability, but also that mentorship piece.
Well, when the State Department figures out how media can make money, maybe they should go across the street to the United States, because this is a worldwide problem that goes, including the AP that just laid off 800 people. So I'm just saying this is not something that's specific to the Pacific Islands. Nobody is making money in media at this point. They haven't figured out how to do it. The way they have figured out how to do it is to turn their companies into more companies that provide a larger range of service. They do events, they sponsor, they do corporate things. They're not just trying to make their money off digital. And actually, we've done a lot of training on sales and marketing, and it's kind of one of our suite that we offer for training. But again, it's just, that is an insoluble issue at this point until you can figure out how you can make money off digital. The New York Times has figured it out because they basically have a subscriber base that wants to read what they produce. So that is one way to do it. But Palau or any Fiji or Solomon Islands, I don't think has reached that level. But having said that, there's a lot of ways to make money, for instance, from Google ads, from Facebook, so we're working on that a lot. In terms of mentorship, I think the State Department's programs, actually, they're long-term programs for journalists. I think they are absolutely the best. People who come here on a Fulbright or the Humphrey Fellows Program, which is at the University of Maryland, which exclusively focuses on journalists. I mean, people go back there, they spend 6 or 9 months here, they work at VOA, they work at a news organization, and they learn a lot, and that's, I think, really the State Department is the gold standard for fellowships and international mentorships.
Great, thank you. Let's go to the audience. Do we have any questions from the audience? I'll go to Jess Stone from VOA News, the front row.
So I grew up in the 80s, and we had Microsoft come into our school, Coca-Cola come into our school. I'm just struck by public-private partnerships and wondering where we are with that, and then where we are with partnering with our friends in the region, because we can't do this with our budget, especially going into the next administration. It's not going to happen if we're pitted against the Midwest for the Pacific Islands, is we're just not going to win that battle. And at least that's my opinion. And I hate to be discouraging, but I think we have to think outside the box on funding. So I'm just wondering, where are we on public-private partnerships? Because China's already just doing it, right? Like, they don't even give you a conversation. They're just like, here's some free Huawei stuff, here's some free TikTok stuff, So if you could weigh in on that, and what conversations, I know we're starting to have conversations in DC, what conversations you're having with your counterparts in other countries along the same lines.
Great, thanks. Camille, maybe I'll turn to you first on that one.
Sure. On the public-private partnerships piece, it is something we actively pursue continually. We recognize that we have to have a whole of society approach to our work in foreign policy globally, but particularly when we are looking at supporting specific needs along these lines. And that goes deeper than the specific issue of capacity building for the information environment and media training, et cetera. It goes also to Sarah's point around providing the digital infrastructure necessary. So it's working with Google on the Google's
Pacific
Connect cable. It is all of those larger infrastructure investments that the U.S. government or any collection of governments is not going to be able to provide, from a government perspective alone. It's private sector investment that's critically important to advancing. Then on the conversation around how we are speaking to partner governments, actually the Pacific Connect cable is a perfect example of that. There are multiple governments involved in now providing, making commitments for funding for individual portions of that cable. And that is largely, done and coordinated through diplomatic engagement, reaching out to countries globally to share information about what we are working on, where we see opportunities, and trying to draw in that partnership. More specifically on some of the media capacity building efforts in the region, I personally have participated in conversations with partners really across the Indo-Pacific region and Europe as well about what we are specifically doing, we the U.S. government, what requests or needs have been identified by Pacific Island countries themselves, and therefore what we are unable to cover from a U.S. government perspective, and just sharing information about needs that have been identified to us that we are unable to meet. Here is something that if you have the resources, we will share information with you and hope that we can coordinate to be able to collectively provide the resources that are being requested.
Joan or Sarah, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I will say I think actually State Department just moved from Australia to New Zealand, right? One of your Pacific Watchers?
We do have, it sort of depends on the program that you're referring to, but we do have a person who is looking at, basically media coverage and narratives across the Pacific, and we do have someone in New Zealand.
Yeah, we work closely with the international organizations, and I would say the Asia Broadcasting Union is really a key organization, and urge the United States to be even more involved. We're members. They have a very active, they're based in Malaysia with a very active Pacific Island group. In fact, they just had a meeting in Brisbane that a number of people, I think, from that are here in the audience from Radio Free Asia went to, as well as some of my people. So that is an organization, an international organization, very involved in Asia, has a distribution network Asia-wide. Unfortunately, the Iranians are extremely involved in this organization, which is why I think the Americans should be even more involved. So yes, we're working very regionally. I think I mentioned Pacifica. We look very closely to Australian Broadcasting Corporation. There's an organization called the DG8, which is the leading state broadcasters in England, United States, BBC, VOA, and they met in Australia this month. So I think there's just a really massive focus of international organizations looking at this region, which is a really great thing. So I think we're not going to do it alone. Everybody said here.
Yeah. If I could add as well, just to say I fully agree with you, Joan. We do not have enough money to do all the things we'd like to do. And so we definitely take approach at USAID of both working with our like-minded partners, our other donors, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Korea. We have a number of projects I could highlight where we are working together. For example, the electrification project in Papua New Guinea, that's with New Zealand, Australia, and Japan. Because if they don't have electricity, the digital, they don't have internet. But also private sector engagement and public-private partnerships has been a huge focus at USAID, not just during this administration, but also previous administrations. Every one of our missions overseas is required to have someone who is the private sector engagement liaison, working to build public-private partnerships. We have a program called EDGE, or EDGE funding, where in order to qualify for the funding, we have to have at least a one-to-one match with a private sector. And then also, I would note, it's not just, so it's the Googles and Intels of the world. We're doing a lot on the tech side throughout Asia, throughout Indo-Pacific, but also the philanthropic arms of a lot of these organizations. So we have a very exciting partnership we're trying to help get launched with the Bezos Earth Foundation that announced last year at COP 100 million for the Unlocking Blue Pacific Prosperity. So we are working very hard to get other donors as well as other private sector engaged. This is to really tackle the most challenging issues when it comes to climate for the Pacific countries. And so just to really foot stomp on what you said, we 100% agree that we cannot do this alone, and that's why we're extremely focused on how can we have progress beyond just our funding and beyond just our programmings, but by partnering with other donors, with private sector, with charities throughout the world, so that we can sort of get the greatest impact to the people we're working with.
It's really exciting. Thank you for overviewing that. So I'm curious if we could drill down. This is a vast region, lots, over 14 countries, multiple territories and islands. How are there areas that we are more focused on? Obviously, there's going to be some strategic overlay to this, but just in terms of media capacity building, are there certain countries that your organizations are more or less focused on? And also, looped in with that, how are we thinking about U.S. territories in all of this, right? Of course, we have Guam, CNMI, American Samoa. We just had a media outlet closing in CNMI. Understanding that you all are mostly working in the international realm, and then of course those are U.S. territories, but yet they are part of the Pacific and they face many of the same challenges as the rest of the Pacific, and they're closely intermeshed with the Pacific Islanders as well, as they are Pacific Islanders themselves. So just curious how we are thinking about that challenge.
I have a very easy answer for that. Number one, we're audience driven. We like big numbers. So basically we're going to focus on the largest countries. So we're going to focus on Papua New Guinea, we're going to focus on Fiji, we're going to look at the larger countries. Number two, we're prohibited from broadcasting to the United States. So end of story.
Yeah, similarly, I mean, from the State Department perspective, we are not focused on the American territories. On the audiences in specific countries within the Pacific region, it is in large part driven by where we have presence on the ground and where we have engagements with the local population, government, civil society, media outlets themselves who identify to us, their desire for content support, etc. Again, going back to an earlier point, we really are focused on listening to the needs rather than trying to impose solutions or offer resources that don't match with what is needed in the local environment. So in many cases it is driven by that interaction, which leads to the sort of individual human interaction and contacts and outreach that then results in specific request for support.
And before I turn to Sara, maybe if I could just reframe that slightly, certainly not meaning that we would do programming in our own U.S. territories, but given that is U.S. territory and we maybe have media professionals there or organizations, how are we maximizing the broadcasting capability there or the connections that, for example, American Samoa?
The law prevents us, Smith-Mundt law prevents us, so we can't do any broadcasting into those countries.
Understood.
What we are actually doing is trying to we've actually working with the Hawaii journalists in Hawaii to try to form some ties. I mentioned we're looking at co-productions. We've thought about working with journalists in Hawaii who have at least they're on the Pacific as we are not. Working with different stations, and so that's sort of what we're trying to do. But there's not much media that I know of in Guam or other territories. American Samoa.
Yeah, I would just echo that actually we certainly are doing a lot of work with organizations and individuals that are Hawaii-based on some of our capacity building and training programs. We work very closely with the East-West Center, for example, who has a strong program focused on journalism.
Sarah?
Yes, we also work with the East-West Center. So we also do not have programs in the U.S. territories, although we do have an exciting new MOU with the University of Guam. This is really part of our effort to reach out to minority-serving institutions in the U.S. to make sure they're aware of USAID and actually to try and get people to come work for USAID. So that's very nascent right now, but I am thinking about how we can connect people at that university with people throughout the Pacific. In terms of our focus, so we have 2 years ago, our administrator reopened, I should say, because we used to have a mission there, our mission in Fiji. That is covering 9 Pacific islands, and that is where we have the most people. We also upgraded our status in Papua New Guinea to a country representative office. That is where we have the second largest number of people staff, and we're still staffing up. Those are also the 2 biggest countries population-wise in the Pacific, so it's not surprising that kind of more funding would go to those 2 countries. But it's definitely not exclusive to those 2 countries. It's kind of about we also, I should mention, have people on the ground in 6 countries in total, with the bulk of them in Fiji and Papua New Guinea. It's about what the priority needs are in any individual country. I would say we do a little less in the compact states, so Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and Palau, because they have other funding from the U.S. government, mainly the Department of Interior. So I'd say USAID, while we are working in those places, it's maybe not quite as the same level as other countries. But yeah, so I don't know if that answered your question, but we are in 12 countries. Right now, USAID is working in 12 countries in the Pacific, and we do have programs in each country. But when you have people on the ground, you can have a different level of impact than you can if we don't have folks. And we are trying to hire local staff in all of the countries we work in, but it takes time. It is slow and very expensive to hire people in the Pacific, but we continue to staff up. I think we've just doubled our numbers in Fiji and Papua New Guinea just in the last year alone in terms of the combined American and local staff. And I should just say USAID worldwide, the majority of our staff are always local staff. And that is a model we use everywhere. They know the situation on the ground the best, they speak the languages, they know the people, and so we really rely very heavily on our Foreign Service national staff when we're implementing programs.
Yeah, and that really doubles down on what Camille was saying earlier about that diplomatic presence piece and how critical that is to be able to hear from each particular country, because these are very different countries with very different cultures and needs across the board. We do have time for one more question from the audience.
Thank you. My name is Nerida King. I'm here with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. I have 2 questions. The first one's probably fairly quick. I wonder if you've been thinking about instituting like a formal mentoring program. I think the long-term programs that you have through the universities here for journalists sound really interesting. But one of the things that the previous panel members mentioned was that ongoing contact with experienced journalists, possibly in the United States, or I'm not sure if they have it elsewhere amongst like-minded partners, but that could be also very valuable and possibly not too expensive if it was set up, but just encouraged through the State Department. And the second question, and I'm thinking here as a think tank representative, what can we do to help promote the work that you're doing? If you're looking ahead to a change in bureaucracy, change in administration, you want some consistency for your activities in the Pacific, how can we help?
Great questions. Joan.
I have a very simple ask. We can give you our website. We can give you our direct system. We have a platform that literally has every piece of content from our entire agency, including Arabic from the Middle East Broadcasting Network. We will give you that site, and then you will just tell people about it and say, hey, download it and take our content. That's all we want. So that's our number one ask. In terms of university mentorships, we actually have a Facebook. I know Facebook was mentioned a number of times, which I thought was fascinating how powerful it is.
Yeah.
We have a Facebook training network that is proving to be extremely valuable. It's got people we train, but it's got about 2,000 people, and we use it as it's super active. I was really surprised. And the State Department has a number of networks too. Does Morrow Foundation, do they have a fellows network? The Murrow Fellows?
So we have...
The Murrow Fellows is the premier journalism program of the State Department where people come here.
Yeah, so absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that program, Joan. So a number of our exchange programs run by the State Department, those are exchanges that could be anywhere from, a few days long to a year long on the longer programs like the Fulbright Scholarship, Humphrey Scholarship program. But after participation in those programs, then the participants become alumni of our exchange programs and are part of an alumni network, which has ongoing programs, databases, where you can get contact information of other participants. And that is where much of the networking and informal mentoring happens. But to your question of maybe more specifically mentor focused programs, it's something we have been hearing a demand for. So I know that we are looking at some models for mentoring in the media space. About a year, maybe actually it's been almost 2 years now, maybe. We launched something called, I think it's the Digital Information Network. I could be wrong about that name. But we had the program launch in Australia, and that is focused on building up a network of media professionals across the region, and has a focus on establishing those mentoring relationships. But your point is a very important one, and I think it's something that we will continue to look at. And then in terms of going forward, I think just continuing to get the word out that it is critically important for publics in the region to have access to fact-based information, and that in order to counter the foreign information manipulation efforts of adversarial actors, this has to be a focus and a place where collectively countries and partners who care about the region and who care about ensuring that the region is able to act in a manner that is free from outside interference, then it's critically important that we provide the support and resources and able to support a strong, independent information environment.
Sarah, anything to add to that?
I would just mention that just on the mentorship piece, USAID also does scholarship programs throughout the world and the Indo-Pacific, and some of those programs, that is a key component, the mentorship piece, depending on the program, as well as alumni groups, so that people can be in touch with, regardless of whether they're studying journalism or computer science, so that the alumni can really be in touch with each other as like an informal networking source. But I think it is an important point. I'm not sure if we're specifically with the programs in the Pacific have a mentorship aspect, but something I will look into.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Perhaps something that would be good to push into the future. Well, please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, and that closes out our media dialogue. Thank you.